time from the 105 to 135 pound boxing divisions. The first fight we're going to go over is something that I'm sure a lot of boxing fans are familiar with. When we had Stephen Fulton go up against Naoya Inoue on July 25th, 2023 for the WBC and WBO junior featherweight world titles. One thing to keep a lookout for throughout this fight is how Naoya Inoue uses his own jab to take away what was going into the fight, the superior jabber in Stephen Fulton, and also just kind of corner him throughout, take away most of his footwork, and just make the fight Inoue's fight rather than Fulton's fight. As you can see in these clips, the body jab in particular really, really hurt Fulton. It was quite unexpected, as anytime he threw that body jab, he knew that there was going to be a right hand coming right over top. But by the time he had figured it out, it was too late. The next fight we'll be highlighting in this series is a bit of a deep cut when we had Ichiro Murata versus Lupe Pintor for the WBC Bantamweight Championship in 1980. While the decision by the end of the fight is a bit controversial itself, this fight is overall very, very good to watch. Lupe Pintor, highlighted here in the blue shorts, is defending his WBC belt for the first time outside of Mexico, and he has a very good start. But Murata doesn't go away easy. They both cut each other up. There's a controversial slip/knockdown. The decision itself is controversial, as I said earlier. It's overall a great fight to watch if you want something dramatic from that late 70s, early 80s golden era for these lighter weight classes. Stay tuned as I continue to showcase some of the most underrated fights in this great sport. Up next, we're going to be highlighting the fight from boxing's smallest weight class when we look at Francisco Rodriguez Jr. versus Katsunori Takayama, which took place on August 9th, 2014 for the IBF and WBO minimum weight championships. This fight isn't the greatest fight of all time skill-wise, but it's definitely interesting. Takayama goes off to an early lead, but Rodriguez really gets himself together and gets a clutch knockdown in the middle, which sets up for an absolute war by the end of the fight. Stay tuned for more. Up next, at number 47, we have Trash Nakanuma, and yes, that's his real name, and it's the greatest boxing nickname of all time, taking on Takafumi Sakata, which was the first fight that took place on April 20th, 2002 for the Japanese flyweight title. This fight has a lot of great inside pocket work shown throughout, a lot of great body work. Both guys are landing heavy hooks on each other, in the pocket, out the pocket, everywhere. It's just an overall great war, great showcase of that Japanese style that from the early 2000s devolved into the likes of Inoue and Juto Nakatani that we see today. And one thing about this fight is I really like how the canvas looks and just the overall presentation. It looks like a grungy action movie from 2002, and it really fits the fight. We're going back to the 1980s with number 46, Junku Chain versus Hilario Zapata 1, which took place on September 18th, 1982 for the WBC Light Flyweight Championship. I've seen this fight described online as Duran versus Pernell Whitaker, with Chain being a stand-in for Roberto Duran and Zapata being a stand-in for Pernell Whitaker, and I definitely agree. Chain is pressuring early while Zapata showcases his excellent defense, excellent spatial awareness, and just being a problem, just being a very elusive southpaw. Chain eventually overcomes that, though, getting success as the aggressor as the fight moves on, and I think this fight is the ultimate game of cat and mouse. It's a fight that is more interesting than it is a pure slugfest, but I definitely think that it's a great study tool for anybody learning how to counter people that have completely opposite styles to them. Chain just goes for it while Zapata is going back, countering the entire fight. It's definitely a good watch. I told you guys there would be deep cuts on this list, and this is no exception. For number 45, we go with Okon Song versus Myeonwoo Ya, which took place on September 8th, 1985. Some people may be familiar with Myeonwoo Ya, as he is known as probably one of the top 5 South Korean boxers of all time, and this fight is right before he goes up to the world level and has some absolute classics that I'll be highlighting on later on in the series. Myeonwoo Ya is really known for his amazing output and being one of the best pressure fighters, especially in the lower weight classes. He has a lot of good body work throughout. Okon Song is very game throughout the fight, though. He keeps going forward, and you'll see what he gets for his tenacity. Stay tuned for more as we continue to explore the underrated side of boxing. For number 44 on the list, we're going back to the USA with Albert Davila versus Frankie Duarte II from 1987. This fight was for the NABF Bantamweight Championship. It was actually a rematch of a fight that took place almost 10 years earlier. Frankie Duarte, though the taller of these men, is actually a very good infighter, and Albert Davila showcased a lot of good outside rangy boxing. This fight goes to prove that your natural capabilities and your body types aren't the only deciding factors in your style. This fight would probably be a lot higher if not for the way it ended. It's a bit of a less than stellar ending, but it's still a great fight nonetheless to check out. At number 43, we have a classic Mexico versus Puerto Rican war when Antonio Avalar from Mexico and in the light blue shorts took on Wilfredo Vasquez in the dark blue shorts from Puerto Rico on May 30th, 1986 in a bantamweight classic. These guys get to it from straight from the bell. They trade knockdowns early. The fifth round in particular is just lightning in a bottle, just chaos going on. The fight evolves more into a brawl, if that's even possible, throughout the fight, and there's a great late finish. This fight is mainly here due to just how fun it is. There is not a technical classic or anything of that sort, but it's definitely a fun fight to put on if you and your friends want to watch something obscure from the 80s. At number 42, we're going to have a showcase for who I think is one of the most skilled boxers of all time, and Ricardo Lopez taking on Saman from July 3rd, 1993 for the WBC Minimumweight Championship. This fight just goes to show how dangerous Ricardo Lopez was in his prime. The jab-based style that he has with no setup, it just comes straight out, and everything's just going to come behind it. Great L steps, distance management that he displays, the 1-1-2 combo that he gets the first knockdown with. This is, in my opinion, one of the best performances in boxing history, especially considering what Saman would later go on to do against other Hall of Famers. The lead uppercut through the guard that he lands with great accuracy that gets the fight finished is one of the best punches I've ever seen. And if anybody wants to learn how to box, I recommend looking at Ricardo Lopez because stylistically, he has one of the most flawless styles that this sport has ever produced. Stay tuned for more. At number 41, we're going with Chain Ho Choi versus Kaisao Galaxy, which took place on October 9th, 1988 for the WBA Junior Bantamweight Championship. While this fight does have a slow start, once it gets going, it's pretty interesting. We have Kaisao Galaxy, who is known as one of the best boxers from Thailand, one of the best guys to transition over from Muay Thai into the world of boxing. And his title reign with the WBA Championship is very, very good, very interesting stuff. He's probably one of the more force in nature fighters in these lower weight classes, and that showcased a lot in this fight as Chain Ho Choi is really trying his best to keep him away, but he just keeps going forward, eating some crazy shots on the way in and just proving that his toughness and overall physicality was just too much for most people in these lower weight classes. Chain Ho Choi tries to put together a comeback with some slick movement, some stick and go type activity, but overall it's just too much, and Kaisao Galaxy walks him down into an 8th round TKO. As we go further into the list, we're starting to move away from these fights that are more showcase fights for the skills of these guys, and then soon we're getting into the absolute wars that came. Stay tuned for more. For number 40, we have Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez versus Sergey Rungvisai 1, which took place on March 18th, 2017 for the WBC Junior Bantamweight Championship. This is the first fight that I'm going to be highlighting from what I call the Four Princes era of junior bantamweight and flyweight that took place in the late 2010s and the early 2020s, consisting of Juan Francisco Estrada, Carlos Cadres, and these two. And this is one of the fights that I think really displayed how good a lot of these guys were at the same time. It was a golden era of the divisions that kind of went under the radar just because of how small they were. But Chocolatito coming into this fight was seen as a monster. He was running through guys, a lot of pressure in his style, heavy hands for the weight classes. Rungvisai had different plans coming into this fight. He stood up to everything Chocolatito was throwing at him and knocked him down early. It was a great fight. A lot of great countering by Chocolatito, which was something that a lot of fans weren't really expecting from him, as this fight was kind of expected to be a bit of a one-way street to the general public. But it was overall a very great fight, a bit controversial, but something to definitely check out. At number 39, we have Yoko Gushikin versus Juan Antonio Guzman, which took place on October 10th, 1976 for the WBA Junior Flyweight Championship. Yoko Gushikin is known as one of the more famous Japanese fighters of the 70s, famed for his permed afro and overall unique appearance, one of the most famous fighters over there to this day even. He gets a lot of shots early on in the first round, but he comes back with a great southpaw hook that gets the knockdown in the second round, which you're seeing right now. Overall, one of the more fun fights on this list that you should definitely check out. Stay tuned as we continue to move through the more underrated aspects of the sport of boxing. At number 38, we have Junhum Choi versus Haruyuki Ohashi, which took place on February 7th, 1990 for the WBC Minimumweight Championship. We're back to the really small guys with this one, as this is a classic South Korea versus Japan matchup, which was really common in the late 80s and early 90s. Ohashi in the blue shorts and the taller of the fighters showcases a great offensive game, a lot of great counters that he lands in this fight, some of which are just insane when you really break them down. Choi, who is the shorter man in the white shorts, is really game throughout. He's really great at pressuring and keeping himself out of danger while going forward, especially early, which I think is one of the best skills that a shorter boxer can have. He's really, really good at that. His uppercuts are great throughout. And Ohashi, while he starts landing a lot of shots to the head later as the fight goes, he's unable to really hurt Choi, as determination really carried Choi throughout this fight for the most part. But he goes to the body, and that body work ends up being really, really drastic and turning the tides of how this fight went. It's an overall great action fight. For number 37, we have the most insane first round that I've ever seen in a boxing match, when Theory Jacob took on Kelvin Seabrooks on July 4th, 1987 for the IBF Bantamweight Championship. As you can see while I was doing the intro, this fight starts off frantic as we have Kelvin Seabrooks in the red just going full throttle from the get-go and knocking down Jacob in the first exchange. Jacob gets his life together, though, and gets his own knockdown with a flurry in the middle, and then ends the round with another knockdown of his own. This is just an insane start to an overall great fight. I'm not going to spoil what happens at the end of the fight, but this is definitely one that you should go check out if you want to see some underrated action from the late 80s. One of the things I wanted to do in this series is to highlight some of the more underrated stuff currently going on in boxing. And in my opinion, the most underrated and best weight class in the sport right now is bantamweight. So for number 36, we're going with Daigo Higa versus Yoshiki Takei, which took place on September 3rd, 2024 for the WBO Bantamweight Championship. Takei is actually a former kickboxer who only has about 10 pro fights, but is already fighting world level competition, much like I predict for Tenshin Nasukawa in the coming years. And Daigo Higa is a grizzled veteran who was always going to go forward, always going to put on a fight no matter who he was going against. He's actually had some pretty notable sparring matches against Naoya Inoue and Takuma Inoue. And this fight is just an absolute war from the get-go. 12 rounds of action, some great stuff that I think anybody that likes action fights should check out. This overall weight class is great. You have guys like Junto Nakatami, Ryosuke Nishida, Seiya Satsumi, Naoya Inoue's brother still in the weight class, Takuma Inoue. You have more of the old head guys like Manny Rodriguez, Jason Maloney, Alejandro Sandiego. So there's a lot of great stuff in this weight class to check out. And definitely keep an eye on this stuff in the future, as I think this is going to be looked as one of the best eras at these lighter weights. Number 35, we're going Alexis Arguello versus Alfredo Escalar 1 from January 28th, 1978 for the WBC Junior Lightweight Championship. This is a great showcase of the great Alexis Arguello, who are standing in around 5'11", 5'10" at these lower weight classes at 130, 126. 135 was just an absolute anomaly. The guy had crazy power despite his weird, lanky frame. You would think that he wouldn't have any power at all, but he definitely proved everybody wrong in that aspect. And this is a great fight overall. Alfredo Escalara has his struggles early on. He gets knocked down, but he builds up a comeback. But Alexis Arguello is just too much of a force in nature. That straight right hand, especially like his 1-2 combos, are definitely good study material for anybody that's lanky and wants to know how to use any of their reach advantages. And while this fight does get stopped due to cuts, it's still a great overall fight that is just something great to watch from that late 70s, early 80s era that you will honestly see a lot of on this list. For number 34, we have a battle between two Mexican Hall of Famers with Lupe Pintor versus Carlos Zarate, which took place on July 3rd, 1979 for the WBC Bantamweight Championship. Pintor, who is in the yellow, versus Zarate in the white, is an overall great fight. Great technical battle, not necessarily the greatest war with a bunch of people getting knocked down and drama and all that, but it's a great fight overall, great study material for anybody. Lupe Pintor struggles with being the shorter man. He's usually good. Great stunning jab is something that he has to really build towards and has to work his way on the inside, but he slowly figures it out over the fight. But Zarate is just very good at adjusting to people. He knows exactly how to deal with shorter fighters, seeing as he himself was about 5'8", 5'9" at bantamweight, which made him one of the lankier guys. I kind of think of him as a Tommy Hearns of these lower weight classes, but he gives Pintor a really hard time, but Pintor is not just going to quit. As you can see, he gets knocked down, gets right back into the fight. An overall great fight between two legends. Coming in at number 33, we have Orlando Canizales versus Kelvin Seabrooks 1, which took place on July 9th, 1988 for the IBF Bantamweight Championship. Orlando Canizales is another one of those really underrated fighters. He's very, very slick, crazy distance management and footwork. As you can see in these highlights, he just used to hit guys when they least expected it after having almost impossible escape routes. That slick defense and lateral movement was just a problem for everybody. But Kelvin Seabrooks, as has already been highlighted in this series, was of always game, always going to come forward and continue to fight. One of the tougher fighters I've ever seen. And he actually comes back after getting knocked down in the first round and starts to slow down Canizales. All that movement and slick defense does have a bit of an expiration date, especially in long, grueling fights. And Seabrook starts to exploit that. But Orlando Canizales, being the great champion he is, gets a second win, ends up finishing Seabrooks in the last round. Definitely check this out. For number 32, we're going with a fight that I'm sure many of you are aware of, with Naoya Inoue versus Nonito Donaire 1, which took place on November 7th, 2019 for the Ring Magazine, WBA, and IBF Bantamweight Championships. This fight is also the ending of the World Boxing Super Series for the Bantamweight class, which took place in 2018 and 2019, and it's something I think that the Turki Al-Sheikh in them should really revisit for any weight class, to be honest. It's just a fun little tournament structure, and it really helps decide who was genuinely the best in a lot of these divisions, especially with all the extra belts and regular intern champs and all that mess going on in boxing nowadays. But back to the fight, Nonito Donaire was really the first big test that Inoue had in the pros. Like, this fight was actually unexpectedly intense. Nonito Donaire was the old guy. It's supposed to be a bit of a passing of the torch, but he came to fight, and Naoya Inoue had to really earn that torch. He shows why he himself is a Hall of Famer. So this is basically a passing of the torch when two future Hall of Famers meet, just put down a great drag-out brawl. Definitely something to watch. It's a lot more accessible than some of the weirder fights on this list. I may have commentary that's in like a foreign language that you don't know. So if you want to watch action that is obtainable and easily accessible from these lower weight classes and want to get into it, I definitely recommend this fight. Number 31 is Hyun-Chol Lee versus Katsuya Onizuka, which took place on September 18th, 1994 for the WBA Junior Bantamweight Championship. 90s Japanese boxing is also one of those great underrated eras that I definitely recommend a lot of people check out. And this is a classic South Korea versus Japan matchup. Onizuka in the black trunks is the more traditional boxer with a great outside footwork game, a lot of great jabs early. Lee is something more akin to the other Korean boxers that we had highlighted, guys like Myeon-woo Ya, and he shows a great chin early on, trying to move in, trying to catch the better technical boxer and turn this fight into more of a brawl, and it definitely works. He hurts Onizuka in the fifth, and this fight just kind of devolves for a moment into a straight-up brawl. But Onizuka gains back control in the middle rounds. Then that final stretch of the 8th and the 9th just becomes a bit of a war of attrition with a lot of insane shots being eaten, a lot of crazy stuff going on. And I'm not going to spoil the ending because it's a great fight to go check out yourself. Breaking into the top 30, we have Hozumi Hasegawa versus Fernando Montiel, which took place on April 30th, 2010 for the WBC Bantamweight Championship. This is a fun, unique Orthodox versus Southpaw battle, with Montiel being the Orthodox fighter in the white and Hasegawa being the Southpaw fighter in the black. This fight is overall very, very good. It has a very slow tactical start, with Hasegawa showing what I call an underrated slick pressure game, working his way inside while also keeping himself safe. He lands some heavy shots. A heavy check right hook is something that a lot of those southpaws are going to really have. And honestly, in my experience, that's what you have to look out for with southpaws, is that check right hook. A lot of people are always worried about that left hand, but that check right hook is what catches a lot of guys. And through the 4th into the 5th round, this fight really gets going. Montiel starts getting a comeback, and it just turns into an overall great brawl. Definitely a great scrap to check out. For number 29, we're featuring two fighters that have already been on the list previously, with Ricardo Lopez versus Hideyuki Ohashi, which took place on October 10th, 1990 for the WBC Minimumweight Championship. Ricardo Lopez, as you probably already know, is one of the better technical boxers of all time, and this was actually his first world title fight, as Ohashi was the defending WBC champion coming in. And despite Ricardo Lopez going on to be very dominant, in this fight he does see a little bit of pushback from Ohashi, who lands some very good shots early and actually showcases that he himself is a very underrated fighter. But Lopez ends up being a bit too much for him, landing a knockdown with a great 1-2 setup. And then he gets another knockdown that is set up with this leaning forward jab that he does that manipulates the range a bit to make it seem like he's a lot further away than he really is. And by the time you realize that, you're already on the ground. And he ends up picking Ohashi apart in these middle rounds and TKOing him on the ropes. For number 28, we have Yuri Arbachakov versus Mionchai, which took place on June 23rd, 1992 for the WBC Flyweight Championship. This is the first fight of their two-fight series and is honestly the best out of the two. Yuri Arbachakov is noted as being one of the first Soviet boxers to actually become a world champion. He did so at flyweight, fighting over in Japan for both the political instability of the time and because of his weight. A lot of the smaller guys always end up fighting over there. And even though he gets knocked down early in this fight against a very game and tough Thai contender, he stays calm and actually ends up coming back to have a quite dominant victory with some very smooth combination punching. Definitely a guy to check out. For number 27, we're going to have Arturo Gatti versus Rosin Rodriguez, which took place on March 23rd, 1996 for the IBF Junior Lightweight Championship. As you can see, this is a typical Arturo Gatti fight where he gets knocked down and then proceeds to have a drag-out brawl for the rest of the fight. And this is probably one of his first big showings, I would say, that really made him popular among a lot of fans, really made him popular for his great comebacks. And Wilson Rodriguez was actually a very good fighter himself, and he lands some great shots on Gatti. Of course, he got the knockdown, but the overall toughness of Arturo Gatti was just too much for him to overcome, and he eventually gets stopped by Arturo Gatti later in the fight. This is a great fight for its accessibility, especially among the lower weight classes. These are familiar. For number 26, we have a fight that's better described as a sprint than a marathon, with Junior Jones versus Kennedy McKinney, which took place on December 19th, 1997 for the WBO Junior Featherweight Championship. Now, Junior Jones in the white trunks starts really good early, getting pressure behind the jab, but Kennedy McKinney in the red shorts is landing sneaky right hands on him throughout the fight. But by the time this gets to the third round, it just kind of gets chaotic, like most of these fights are going to do at this point. Junior Jones gets a third round knockdown, and then Kennedy McKinney just pulls together a very sporadic comeback in the fourth that leads to a TKO victory. This fight is very, very interesting. Something to watch if you want to watch a fight that goes for 4 rounds. It's not much of a commitment time-wise. If you want to just see some crazy stuff happen in a short period of time with two great fighters, this is definitely a go-to fight for you.